There's a lot of compassion and support from Canadian citizens all across Canada and even beyond Canada for what's going on here.
Tonight, not everyone is opposed to the anti-mandate convoy.
Unfortunately, there are now 13 people, staff and clients, who have tested positive for the virus.
Meanwhile, the pandemic marches on.
When we hunt and fish in the off season, it's not really for money, just for our way of life and keeping our traditions alive, hunting and fishing.
And a look at what Mi'kmaw fishers do when they're not after lobster. Good evening, I'm Dennis Ward. Welcome to APTN National News. The ongoing Freedom Convoy in Ottawa is attracting people from all walks of life, including a Liberal member of Parliament who appeared to be at odds with his own party, and a First Nations man from Northern Ontario. APTN's Fraser Needham has more.
Brendan Addison has been in Ottawa since the Freedom Convoy protest began late last month. The 33-year-old First Nations man is a heavy truck mechanic who lives on Manitoulin Island. He says the ongoing occupation of the city's downtown core has been misportrayed in the media, and the majority of the people involved are not racist or extremists, but just regular Canadians who don't agree with vaccine mandates.
The other side that I feel that's not being shared is there's a lot of compassion. There's a lot of compassion and support from Canadian citizens all across Canada and even beyond Canada for what's going on here, because it's truly about more than just truckers and being able to have a border mandate removed now.
Nimkis Addison says people are worn out by the COVID-19 pandemic, and the vaccine mandates and restrictions are driving people further apart.
And whether it's intentional or non-intentional, what these mandates are doing, making it so that you have to use a QR code to even go into a store and buy a lunch or get a haircut or stuff like that, it's truly dividing people.
What he is saying isn't a whole lot different than what one Liberal MP had to say Tuesday morning. Breaking ranks with his government in a press conference, Joel Lightbound also said the Freedom Convoy movement has been misrepresented for political purposes.
I've seen on Radio-Canada an interview with what seemed to be a very kind grandmother who demonstrated for her grandkids. She looked and sounded nothing like a white supremacist, nor did the Black, Sikh, and Indigenous Canadians I saw demonstrating on my way to Parliament these last 2 weeks. Or in Quebec.
And Lightbound said the Trudeau government does not see how the vaccine mandates and restrictions are affecting all Canadians.
I've heard from people worried that those making the decisions seem at times to have been blind to the fact that we're not all equal before lockdowns, that not everyone can earn a living on a MacBook at the cottage.
Lightbound said what the country now needs is a roadmap of how these mandates and restrictions will eventually end, something the government has failed to provide. Fraser Needham, APTN National News, Ottawa.
Still in Ottawa, we go now to Carleton University professor Jeffrey Monahan. He studies how security and policing agencies handle Indigenous-led civil disobedience. He joins us to offer some of his analysis. Professor Monahan, thanks for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
In brief, what has your research uncovered about how these agencies treat Indigenous protests versus non-Indigenous protests?
Well, my research primarily looks at how policing and security agencies treat Indigenous protests. And I can tell you, certainly over the last 10, 20 years when I've been kind of tracking these various practices, is that there's a lot of preparation that goes into Indigenous protest policing. There's all kinds of surveillance that goes in ahead of time. There's all kinds of preparations on the ground that goes in. There's these elaborate systems of liaison and kind of cooperation that are set up ahead of time, all of which aim to kind of control and contain Indigenous protests when they happen.
So how do you think the authorities have handled the convoy here, which is getting close to approaching 2 weeks in downtown Ottawa?
Absolutely. There's been all kinds of mistakes. There's been all kinds of real head-scratching activities that have been happening here in Ottawa. In part, there's this regular toolbox that's used against Indigenous people, environmental movements, all kinds of different protests. A lot of it is geographic control, mobility control. A lot of it is preemptive kind of preparedness, like I was describing. And all of that didn't seem to happen for the truckers. They kind of let them roll into town. They basically have allowed them to have a zone in town that they've just kind of controlled and occupied themselves. And what we've seen in kind of like the textbook of protest policing that's become kind of the norm in Canada hasn't been employed at all when it comes to this group here.
We've just posted a story from our web team that reports the military's counterintelligence unit, which exists to protect Defense Department assets, says this convoy poses no security threat. What do you make of that?
Yeah, it's curious to see it in all kinds of ways. That specific counterintelligence unit was quite active during Idle No More and also in the LC Plug Dog demonstrations that happened several years ago. And it collected a huge amount of information on Indigenous protesters, in part related to military assets, but also because it really framed Indigenous protests as national security threats. It framed them as groups that could destabilize the country in some ways. And here we have protests in Ottawa which have actors who are explicitly trying to overthrow the government and kind of form a kind of coup-like coalition structure and engage in all kinds of really, really extreme demands. And all of a sudden, they're even stockpiling gasoline and diesel right beside the national headquarters of the Defense Department, and all of a sudden you have this national security agency, this defense agency, saying that there's no particular concern. So it raises a lot of question marks about how different groups get policed differently.
Sure does. Professor Monahan, we'll have to leave it there, but appreciate your insight here.
Anytime, thanks.
Meanwhile, Saskatchewan's premier has made it official and announced he's lifting all proof of vaccination requirements. Scott Moe says the province's COVID-19 proof of vaccination policy will end on Valentine's Day. The move means that people will no longer have to show vaccine passports to go to public places such as bars and restaurants. Other health measures will stay in effect for now. That includes wearing a mask in indoor public spaces. While Moe says the benefits of the proof of vaccination policy no longer outweigh the costs, he says people should still get vaccinated.
Vaccination, as we know, is not preventing transmission of Omicron like it did with previous variants. And I will continue to encourage everyone and anyone that is eligible to go out and get vaccinated, your first, your second, and ultimately your booster dose, as vaccines most certainly do provide significant protection against serious illness from Omicron or any other variant.
Now, the Federation of Sovereign Indigenous Nations says band members should still practice all safety protocols outlined by the Northern Intertribal Health Authority. To Nunavut, where the government took questions from reporters today about their COVID-19 response. There are now 19 Nunavut communities with a positive case of COVID. Right now, there are reported 336 cases of COVID-19 in Nunavut. Due to a drop in testing, that number is more of an estimate than a statistic. So far, 19 people have been in hospital over the Omicron wave, but the government could not confirm how many of them are still in hospital. And now, a Cambridge Bay nursing home is the latest source of an outbreak.
There are now 13 people, staff and clients, who have tested positive for the virus. Fortunately, all elders at the center are fully vaccinated and have had their booster, which will reduce the risk of serious illness and hospitalization.
Well, it's been almost 3 weeks since the Yukon government declared a public health emergency over skyrocketing fatal opioid and addiction overdoses. But as our reporter Sarah Connors tells us, some people are calling on the government to do more. Here's a preview of that story.
All I think about is my sister, and she was such a good person.
2022 is set to be the worst year by far on record for opioid deaths in the Yukon. Tomorrow on APTN, we take a look at the impact the territory's opioid crisis is having on families.
It's hard. We lost so many people, and we need to just put an end to this somehow.
And we speak to a former addict who says the government solutions to the crisis are coming up short.
The resources up here are very limited, which is why, I think that's the problem is just carrying on.
That's coming soon on APTN National News.
Welcome back. The Abenaki Band Council of Willinak want to partner with energy company Questair. The council will allow shale gas development on their traditional territory in exchange for economic benefits. The signature for the final agreement is still pending, but some Abenaki feel blindsided by the deal. Amelia Fournier has more.
The MOU between Questair and the Willinak Band Council outlines plans for a pilot net zero emissions gas production hub on the traditional territory of the Abenaki First Nation of Willinak. Questair announced the signature of the Joint Economic Development Agreement on January 20th, but the council only shared the news with the community on January 31st.
Tandis que Willinak, eux autres, il n'y a eu aucune information à part avant-hier que j'ai vu sur Facebook. Là. Fait que c'est vraiment beaucoup trop serré comme délai. Là, on n'a pas eu le temps pantoute de rien préparer. Là.
Tommy Gill is the Grand Chief of the Wabanaki Warriors Society. He lives in the neighboring Abenaki community of Odanak. He says he is responsible to protect Wabanaki territory. Gill says it's not the first time band councils have made this kind of announcement without community consultation.
C'est encore le problème sur les communautés qu'on a défendu déjà dans le passé contre les pipelines, contre le projet OTE qui était ici à Odanak. Puis que là, on veut vraiment pas s'assurer d'avoir de la pollution sur nos terres, d'avoir de la contamination.
Gill and other Abenaki warriors are planning to organize opposition to the project. The Wolinack Band Council's Facebook post announcing the agreement provoked negative comments. But Questerre's CEO Michael Binion says further consultations with the rest of the community will take place before the final agreement is signed.
We've taken the initiative as a private company to be proactive about recognizing unextinguished rights over traditional territories, that you should have a right to participate. It's a precedent that I think would be important for First Nations.
The agreement includes profit sharing and a commitment to using Abenaki businesses. He says this pilot project will test new fracking-free shale gas extraction methods along the Nicolette River.
In this sense, I give a lot of credit to the environmental movement in Quebec, that their protests and their moratorium and all of that forced me to say, okay, is there another way to do this?
Binion says this production will have net zero carbon emissions by using electric equipment and recycling captured carbon dioxide. Questerre still has to navigate the legalities with Quebec. The government prohibits extraction of oil and gas in the province, including on Indigenous territory. The Wolinack Band Council declined APTN's request to be interviewed on the subject. Emilia Fournier, APTN News, Abenaki Territory, Quebec.
To the East Coast now, and Migma fishers don't just harvest lobsters. On the North Shore of Nova Scotia, they ice fish for eels, a traditional Mi'kmaw dish. But the catch is not as good as previous seasons. APTN's Angel Moore was on the ice to find out why.
The spear is about 14 feet long. It reaches the mud at the bottom of the harbor where the American eels are nestled. Derny Nicholas hooks one. The American eel, gad in Mi'kmaw, is a traditional food and used in ceremony. Nicholas, taught by his elders, explains the process.
Go things around again, then you move up again, and then further away. Then you finish, and then you go in the next hole, you make one, and just like that all day.
A.J. Francis, Nicholas's nephew, gave me a lesson. Stab the mud in a circle around the ice hole to hook an eel. I had no luck. Both men of Pictou Landing First Nation are commercial fishermen, and off-season, they ice fish on the Antigonish Harbor, located about 200 kilometers northeast of Halifax, a family tradition important to Francis.
Yeah, when we hunt and fish in the off-season, it's not really for money, just for our way of life and keeping our traditions alive, hunting and fishing.
Nicholas was able to catch a couple of eels and called it a day. Back at Nicholas's shed,
we're going to clean some eels to catch today. A couple of big ones. Good size.
The eel is sliced, partly gutted, and the skin is pulled off.
I'm going to salt it and tan it, and I'll make something out of it.
Nicholas says the skin is strong, enough to support a broken bone.
One time I'm going to make, like somebody got broken arm or leg, they wrap around there, just like a strong, like a cast.
The meat can be baked, fried, or boiled. One tradition Nicholas taught his nephew.
He's been my mentor when I was younger. I got my first tuna with Derny, and I got my first moose with Derny. Yeah.
But this harvest and the traditions associated with it could be at risk. Because back on the ice, Nicholas's first catch of the day was too small. Nicholas put it back in the water. It can take 20 years for an eel to mature. Francis ice fishes with his uncle every winter. He's noticed a decline in eels in the last few years.
over time, like we used to get a lot of big eels. It was easy to get, plentiful, and over the years they're kind of declining a little bit, and it's harder, fewer and fewer bigger ones, and I just noticed that myself over the years.
According to the Government of Canada website, in 2012, the American eel was a species at risk due to pollution, dams, and existing fisheries. The last report on American eels was in 2019, but how the stocks are doing was inconclusive due to lack of data. The Department of Fisheries and Oceans did not respond to an interview request. Meanwhile, Nicholas and Francis will keep eeling and hunting until the commercial fishery starts in the spring. Angel Moore, APTN National News, Antigonish Harbour, Nova Scotia.
I've not had eel. Have to ask Angel how that was. Time for another quick break. Still to come, a Métis curler is now among some elite company. Stick around. Welcome back. Time now for our photo of the day. Our viewer Randy Phobister sent in this photo of the sun along the skyline of what looks like a service road or maybe an ice road deep in the bush somewhere. I would venture a guess of Northern Ontario. Keep those photos coming to share at aptn.ca and be sure to include any details about places, people, or things about your picture. Then tune in each day to see our next photo of the day. Let's take a look at tomorrow's weather forecast. Starting on the East Coast, +6 with showers in St. John's, 0 and snow in Charlottetown. -9 in Kuujjuaq, 11 below in Nain. -1 in Montreal, snow and 3 below for Chibougamau. +1 with snow in Sault Ste. Marie, flurries and 0 in North Bay. -6 with flurries in Thunder Bay, 2 below in Sioux Lookout. -18 in God's Lake and Thompson. +1 in Winnipeg and Gimli, 7 below for Dauphin. 0 in Regina, +1 with snow in Saskatoon. +2 in Meadow Lake and La Ronge, where snow is expected. In northern Alberta, +4 in Fort McMurray, 5 above in Peace River. 8 in Edmonton, 13 for Lethbridge. +8 in Victoria and Vancouver, where showers are expected. 10 in Prince George with rain. 8 in Dease Lake. -31 with snow in Old Crow. +6 in Whitehorse. -20 for Yellowknife and Wrigley. -30 in Sax Harbor. 1 degree warmer in Pawlatuck. -35 in Chesterfield and Whale Cove. -34 in Resolute, 40 below in Joe Haven. To the world of sports now, and the title of Best Women's Curling Team in Canada has once again been claimed by the team of Carrie Einarson. Team Einarson beat Krista McCarville's Northern Ontario team 9-6 Sunday to win her 3rd straight Scotties Tournament of Hearts. Einarson is Métis from Manitoba, and she joined some exclusive company. Only a handful of teams have won the tournament 3 times in a row. Einarson was also last year's Tom Longboat Award winner. Val Sweeting, Shannon Burchert, and Brianne Mueller round out Carrie's team. Next up is the World's Women's Curling Championship in Prince George, BC, March 19th to the 27th. Huge congrats. A University of Winnipeg student has released an app to help people learn the Swampy Cree language. Cameron Adams has been working on his app called Nahinawewin since 2018, and it is now available for free on the App Store. Adams got the idea after taking Swampy Cree language classes at the University of Winnipeg. The app is like a dictionary with numerous words and phrases, but it also has audio to assist those learning. Adams hopes the app can help new people learn the language and even assist those who already know it.
I think it's for everyone. Obviously, people who don't know the language will use it probably the most. But if it's for a speaker that grew up speaking the language and, has been disconnected from the language, it might be a memory jogger, for lack of a better term, right? It might be like, oh my God, I heard that word from my grandmother, right? Wouldn't that be cool to be able to hear that?
Good stuff. Enoch rocker Willie Thrasher and record producer Kevin Howes are our guests on a new episode of Face to Face tonight. The two have just re-released Thrasher's 1994 album, Indian Inuit Country. Thrasher tells us why his lyrics often focus on his culture and the land.
I had to go to residential school, taking away all my culture, which is wiped right out of my head. And my dad and mom were living hunting and living off the land in Mackenzie River. And the summertime, I would go back and see them and live with them until I had to go back to the residential school. But I've seen a lot of things would change dramatically, and it was hard for me to try to find many of my traditional ways. And the way I found out it was through my uncle, through my grandfather, and listening to stories from the elders, and that's how it became to be an Inuit songwriter. I wrote music of the life I missed so much.
And Willie's got a lot of great stories. You can watch our entire interview with Willie and Kevin Howes in just about less than a minute's time. That is all the time we have for your APTN National News for this Tuesday. You can find much more over on our website, aptnnews.ca. And be sure to join us here at 3 p.m. Eastern Time tomorrow when Melissa puts Indigenous tourism in focus. It's going to be a winter blast of a show. I'm Dennis Ward. Thanks for being with us. Stick around. Face to Face is next. Have a great night.